Members, greetings. We have formed a quorum and we can begin now. Members, this meeting is conducted entirely in a remote way. If any member would like to speak, please use raise hand function. And when your speaking time limit is almost up, on the Zoom screen, our helper will show the counting down of the timer. And when time is up, there will be a ring signal of the timer. Let me remind members that during the meeting, you have to switch on your camera and show your face. And then at my instruction, the microphone will be switched on. Item 1 of the agenda, information papers issued since last meeting. The papers are set out in the agenda for your information. Item 2, dates of next meeting and items for discussion. In May, our regular meeting will be held on 17th May, Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. The administration proposed the following 2 items. First, support measures for SMEs. 2, progress of development of trade single window system. For that item, well, it is related to funding proposal. So members, do you agree? Any comments? If no comments, then so these are the items to be discussed. Agenda item 3, updating Hong Kong's copyright regime, outcomes of public consultation and proposed way forward. So now let me welcome from the administration, Mr. Edward Yao, Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development, and his colleagues. In order to make sure that members can speak in an orderly way, can our helpers please remove all the raise hand signals first. Now, if you would like to speak, please press raise hand on Zoom. And later on, I will call upon members to speak. Now, let me invite Mr. Edward Yao to speak, please. Thank you, Chairman and members. Chairman members, I look forward to presenting this item to LegCo today because concerning the amendment to the copyright ordinance, well, it has been discussed many times in LegCo. However, so far there has not been an outcome yet. So I hope that today, when we brief members on outcomes of public consultation, we hope to get members' agreement so that we're able to table the amendment to the copyright ordinance to LegCo for scrutiny. In fact, this has been outstanding for more than 10 years, and we hope that appropriate amendments can be made. I'm sure you all know the importance of the copyright regime, especially that Hong Kong is a free and commercial society respecting copyright. Well, we need a comprehensive and a sound copyright regime that can keep pace with time. In this way, copyright as private property rights can be protected and users can also make use of copyright, and a good balance can be struck between the two. All along, Hong Kong has very good conditions to protect our intellectual property. Under the 14th five-year plan, well, it is stated clearly that Hong Kong is given a new economic task, and that is Hong Kong should develop into a regional IP trading center. We all understand that Hong Kong is a place that respects rule of law. And in terms of protecting IP, well, Hong Kong enjoys high international status. So we need laws that can protect copyright. This is very important in order to be developed into a regional and national IP trading center. I think this is a prerequisite. In the past, in LegCo, actually in 2001 and 2014, we tabled a bill. And at that time, we'd like to update the copyright ordinance. On one hand, parts that are outdated or parts that can keep up with time, and also technological development and commercial operation, we'd like to amend them. And there may be parts that are not clear, not complete. So we hope to amend the law in order to rectify the situation. Even though on one occasion the bill has been scrutinized by the Bill Committee and there was almost a consensus. However, in 2014, the bill still was not tabled for second reading. So this is really a pity. So after we have a better relationship between the executive and legislature, and with the new legislative council formed, at the first instance, we had done a public consultation. And recently, when the public consultation was completed, we would like to table this in the new LegCo. So later on, the Commissioner for Intellectual Property, that is Director of Intellectual Property, will give you more details. Well, in 2014, the Bills Committee of LegCo had formed some consensus to the bill, and that is going to be our blueprint and a starting point for our public consultation as well. So among the comments received during public consultation, well, comments were made by members of the industry and from professional bodies, from different organizations and chambers of commerce. I can say that the majority are in agreement. They are aware that there is the urgency to update the copyright ordinance. And for the 2014 bill, since there was already a consensus, it is a good starting point for us to work on this copyright ordinance. So if these can be done, we do have the right conditions to table the bill again for LegCo's scrutiny. Of course, this is not the end of our work. Legally speaking, in the future, there may still be many needs to update the bill or the law. However, if we still dwell upon things that we have not reached a consensus, we should rather concentrate on things that we have got consensus. And that is the 5 areas, the 5 main areas should be the main focus because broad consensus has been reached. So now I'm going to defer to my colleague to talk about outcome of the public consultation and the way forward. Thank you, Secretary. Now I'm going to brief members on public comments received and also the government's legislative proposal. As the Secretary said, most members of the public had said that there is an urgency to amend the copyright regime, and basically they support our use of the 2014 bill as the basis of legislative amendment. And they hope that the government can work with LegCo as soon as possible so that the amendments can be passed as soon as possible. Some respondents gave some comments on some individual legislative proposals. For example, some people are of the view that concerning the newly added provision on communication rights and how broad the scope is, well, they have some comments. And different stakeholders have comments on the newly added safe harbor provisions. And there are comments made on the exceptions as well. So, okay. This time, in the consultation document, we proposed to use 2014 bill as the basis for the amendment. In the consultation document, we also talked about 4 areas that were given a lot of concern previously. So we are going to maintain status quo, and there is not the need to amend the ordinance based on those 4 areas. First, copyright exceptions. And number 2, the contract overrides. Number 3, illicit streaming devices. And number 4, judicial site blocking. For these 4 copyright issues, most respondents support that the government should maintain the current approach on 2 areas, that is, exhaustive approach to exceptions, and contract override should continue to be allowed. So most respondents agree to the government's approach on these 2 points. Besides, there are a number of copyright users proposed to the government that illicit streaming devices should be targeted at, and also judicial site blocking should also be worked on. But then the majority is in agreement with the government, and that is, at this point in time, no special provisions are needed, and they do not have any comment on the government's position. So after taking into consideration public comments, and since the majority of respondents are in agreement that the 2014 bill should be the basis of this legislative amendment exercise, and so the amendments should be passed as soon as possible, now we propose to LegCo that the 2014 bill should be used as the basis to amend the CO so that we can better meet the needs in the digital environment and to perfect our copyright regime. In our drafting process, we take into consideration different stakeholders' views, and we clarify and amend certain provisions when necessary. We also take the opportunity to make technical amendments to the ordinance. Regarding the concrete legislative proposal, this time, there are 5 areas which we have already got broad consensus that we should work on. Number 1, in light of technological development, we should offer to copyright owners the right to do communication to the public. And then any electronic means can be used for communication, and they should be given legal protection. In other words, after the law is amended, copyright owner, by means of streaming technology or other new electronic methodology, can get better protection when they transmit copyright works. Besides, there's the new communication right, and concerning infringement acts, there should be criminal liabilities to be laid down. And number 3, in the bill, we will add or amend some copyright exceptions in a few areas. So online learning should be facilitated, and operation of libraries, archives, and museums should be facilitated. And then OSPs should be allowed to handle data in a faster way, and then media shifting of sound recordings should be facilitated. There should also be new copyright exceptions for 3 categories of purposes, namely parody, satire, caricature, and pastiche, commenting on current events, and quotation of copyright works. So overall speaking, for these exceptions, we would like to maintain an appropriate balance between copyright protection and reasonable use of copyright works. The 4th point is we'd like to encourage the OSPs and copyright owners to cooperate to combat online copyright infringement. So we introduced the safe harbor provisions. So when OSPs meet certain prescribed conditions, including taking reasonable steps to limit or stop a copyright infringement when being notified, then infringement acts on the platform, OSPs only need to bear limited legal responsibility. And then the last point, in civil cases where there is infringement, and when assessing whether to award additional damages to copyright owners, we think that we would like to introduce 2 additional statutory factors. First, unreasonable conduct of an infringer after having been informed of the infringement, and 2, the likelihood of widespread circulation of infringing copies as a result of the infringement. So the court has better ground to determine additional damages to copyright owners. In digital environments, copyright owners will be better protected. So this time, we hope members can note the outcome of the consultation, public consultation. The points are set out in the paper. And on our legislative proposals, we would like to listen to members' views. We are more than happy to respond to questions from members. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We will now take questions from members. I will read your names out so that you can get prepared. Mr. Fo Kwai Kong, Yao Tat Gun, Tam Mok Hong, Leung Chi Wing, Hong Chun Shek, Lam Pin Fong, Chang Men Kwong, Hong Men, Ma Fong Kwok, Liu Chong Kong. So far, all of you and Cheng Yan Yu have raised your hands. 4 minutes Q&A. Because there is another meeting right after ours, we will have no extensions. Please make good use of your time. Thank you. I'm very concerned about this topic. Most of the stakeholders have been waiting for this amendment for a very long time, so thank you very much, Secretary, and also the head of ITD for previous rounds of discussions. Back in 2018 with Mr. Chance, for a number of reasons and filibustering, the amendment was not passed. So today, in terms of copyright law and protection of IP, is really lagging behind compared to other places near us by 1 decade. If you look at Singapore or mainland China, 2 years ago and last year, they have already updated their local copyright laws. So we really need to implement the positioning of Hong Kong as IP center. Under the 14th five-year plan, it is the right time, and this is something we must achieve. We're very concerned about this ordinance. I have met with many stakeholders, several rounds. I've concluded some views, and I've brought them to the administration. We do want to endorse it as soon as possible. But in terms of exceptions and also the safe harbor arrangements, there are some concerns. The biggest concern is that it newly added 28A 4 to 6. The coverage is too wide. We are worried that we won't be able to effectively curb unauthorized applications and streaming, etc. The administration has responded to these matters. There will be no full exemption of legal responsibility, and they will also seriously consider the points. So concerning such amendments, what are the details now? Can you update us? And then it's important to do public promotion. Some simple guidelines have been offered last time around, but it's not very effective. How are you going to remove concerns from the public? At the Finance Committee last time, 85 million allocation. How can you help ITD to hire more people? ITD said it will focus on the patent side instead of hiring more people for intellectual property. Are you going to review that arrangement? Actually, I understand that the manpower is very tight or insufficient. The secretary also said that this is not the end point. Overall speaking, the industry agrees that we have to catch up with international standards and have the amendments ASAP. So hopefully we can solve everything based on the 2014 blueprint. We urge you to continue our dialogue and communication, and every 2 years, perhaps a new round of review on the ordinance. Can we extend the copyright protection period to 70 years, and how to curb illegal streaming devices, etc. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Fogg. Although you are not a member of this panel, you are working very hard and attending our meetings. For this term of LegCo members, Mr. Fogg and other members have talked to us many rounds. Our failure in 2014 has led to the sector's disappointment and frustration. When I started my job in 2017 and I chatted with people, many people said they have no expectation. So a lot of frustration there. And that is also why this time we want to be practical. We need to look at the level of consensus and foundation for us to prepare this work. Just to respond to Mr. Fogg's point, we are lagging behind not just by 1 decade. When we proposed it back in 2011, we were already lagging behind by a whole decade. So it is truly unfair to the sector. But you need to understand that not every presented point of view will make everyone satisfied. As Mr. Fogg has said, copyright users and owners, sometimes they are on opposing ends. So we have to find the balance. We may not be able to do everything. As Mr. Fogg has said, 28 bracket A is one example. My colleague will cover that in a moment, but we need to reach a consensus today with all the members. Should we go ahead and do it? And should we do the update as soon as possible? We would like to get your support. Thirdly, we need a starting point. If we have clear consensus already, we should move ahead right away. In that case, we can move along the timetable very quickly, and there is no need to worry about one amendment done, and then we do nothing for a long time. If there are further views from the sector or new issues emerge, we can continue with the amendment practice. But at least this late coming amendment, the sooner we can do it, the better. Secretary, 4 minutes only, okay? Many people are waiting. IPT Director, thank you. 28A 4 to 6 is about striking a balance between the use of copyright and public interest, so that reasonable behavior will not lead to netizens falling into this legal net, so to speak. We have talked to many practitioners and stakeholders many times, so we will look at all the details and see if there is any room for legal clarification. As for the IPD resources, patent is very important. So of course, we have a dedicated team, but at the same time, when it comes to copyright, we'll continue to spare no effort. As I said earlier, after this amendment exercise, we see that there is more to be done. If you look at our track record, every few years, there will be some review on copyright legislations, and we will talk to you further. As for other copyright issues about trademark, for example, next year, we should be able to introduce a new trademark registration system to Hong Kong, and we will allocate the resources necessary. Thank you. Mr. Xu. Well, Mr. Secretary, I was quarantined in January. Many people worried about me, and they gave me many links to various websites. Sometimes you can get the latest movies in high resolution. You can watch football games. All of them were infringements. This is a serious matter. Nowadays, there are many such infringements, and you gain easy access. So I agree with this amendment, but there are some details. I want to cover 2 points for your consideration. First of all, we talked about the safety harbor. Mr. Fogg already talked about that. I won't repeat myself, but for ISP operators, we are quite concerned that AI is used to go online to identify infringement possibilities, and then they will be passed on to the operators. The operators are concerned about too much workload. We do understand the provision in relation to the safe harbor, but will the government offer any kind of subsidy? Because people or operators have to add additional manpower to deal with this matter. Another point mentioned by Mr. Falk, I also agree. Why don't we just ban all streaming devices? There are some reasons put forth in the document, for example, injunctions are available, but you need to queue up. It takes time. You need to find a lawyer to do it. It's going to cost you money. Every few months, softwares have been updated on such devices. By the time you get the injunction, things are already very different. You can't ban them at all. Why not go ahead of this technology and think about the ban on the sales of such streaming devices? If you just rely on the injunction, you can't catch up. Another point is about international practice. Singapore and Malaysia seem to be the only places with such prohibitions. It doesn't mean that we have to wait for everyone else to do it. And in the US, infringement will involve a lot of penalty, but in Hong Kong, it's very limited. So should we consider about banning such streaming devices? I will ask Mr. Wong to reply. Thank you, Mr. Chu, for the question. Two things here. First of all, about communication rights, we do understand that online infringement is quite easy. So as Mr. Yao has said, we are catching up that difference of more than 1 decade. We want to tell the public and copyright owners and users very clearly which activities will be protected by the ordinance. So we are offering this exclusive communication right to such people. So we need to define clearly what are infringement activities so that the stakeholders and the government officials have clear legal foundation to deal with such infringements. Secondly, when it comes to the safe haven, we understand that there are views coming from online operators. Hong Kong is not the only place doing this. Europe, US, UK, Australia, Singapore are all using the same set of international standards to set up this safe haven measure. If you look at their operation, they are achieving their original target, and we hope that we can catch up by offering additional protection to providers so as to minimize legal liability. And then about illegal streaming devices, we understand what the current situation is. But under the copyright regime, under this digital regime, we need to clearly define what is public communication. So it really depends on the level of evidence to see if it is caught by the legal net or the liability. Whether it is a civil case or criminal case, we need foundations. In some countries, we do see that there are some special handling, but that is the minority, or they are very recent cases. So we will keep a close eye on the development. After we enact the new copyright ordinance, we will see how we can better protect copyright. Next, Tamo Hung. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Yao. I think the government should amend the copy ordinance as soon as possible. It's very pressing. This is a digital era. We need laws to protect copyrights in this digital environment, to prevent and limit infringement acts. So I agree with what all of you have said. I support the amendment exercise. There are two minor points. First of all, concerning the amendment proposals, the government is saying that there should be exceptions for parody, satire, caricature, and pastiche, commenting on current affairs, and quotation. But there are still concerns about secondary creation. whether what they have created will fall under the scope of these things. They are worried. So they have many questions.
So after some period of implementation, so let's say if there are some political comments made, can they be exempted? When the government drafts the bill, so concerning parody, satire, caricature, and pastiche, can there be further definitions on the exceptions? And concerning commentary on current affairs, can there be definition on the scope of use so that people doing secondary creation will know clearly whether they are against the law so as to avoid infringement? Number two, the amendments are based on the 2014 bill. Well, we are now 8 years after 2014, but then the amendments should keep pace with time. The amendment should be in line with current technological developments. But this time in the amendments, when it comes to text and data, will there be some specific copyright exceptions? Now, when it comes to data mining, different disciplines, deep learning, AI, and so on are involved. So can these be considered together with the circumstances of different industries? I believe the exceptions can help facilitate future research and innovations in tertiary institutions so that Hong Kong can develop into a smart city and our AI development can be facilitated. In Japan, Singapore, and other overseas countries, there are this kind of exceptions. So if Hong Kong doesn't do these, will we be in a very passive position? So concerning text and also data extraction or mining, can there be some copyright exception? Yes, thank you. Let me remind you that 4 minutes will include both question and answer because the next meeting will start right away and we cannot extend our meeting. So please try to be concise. Director, thank you for the question. Regarding parody, satire, caricature, pastiche, and political commentary, is it better to have definition or not? Well, last time there was a lengthy discussion on that. And we are of the view that some flexibility can be left for the court to interpret. That will give more protection to users. That is the consensus reached in 2014. Under common law regime, this is a feasible and satisfactory approach. And then concerning development of text or data mining, we know that this is new copyright issue, and we know that it has to be worked on. In Annex C, para 41 to 44, we presented the government's preliminary position that these should be worked on. But as the Secretary said, this legislative amendment wants to catch up with time, and we are handling the most urgent points. So when the amendments are done, then there is a new foundation for us to handle ever-changing copyright-related issues. So in the areas of AI and better utilization of technology, Hong Kong can keep up with the latest development so that Hong Kong can serve as an IP trading center. Thank you. Mr. Leung Chee-wing. Mr. Leung Chee-wing. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I agree that the copyright ordinance should be amended as soon as possible because we need to keep pace with time. We should not stay in an old era. The government is of the view that tackling illicit streaming devices and provisions on that should not be introduced because based on overseas experience, there are seldom these provisions, but we cannot compare Hong Kong and overseas. In Hong Kong, many ISDs are very widespread in the market. They are commonly sold. So when it comes to provisions on communication rights, I think copyright owners can be facilitated to combat illegal activities. So these provisions can help copyright owners to take legal actions. Now, if there are provisions combating ISDs? Can the government tell us what will be the adverse impacts? If not, then can such provisions be added so that copyright owners can take actions against illicit streaming? Which jurisdictions have you taken reference from in putting together the safe harbor mechanism? In those jurisdictions, how is their safe harbor mechanism like? And are there mechanisms close to that of Hong Kong? Thank you. Director, I will ask the director to answer these two concrete questions. Thank you, Mr. Leung. So let me talk about our ISD first. In the internet world, when it comes to ISDs, very often they are actually technology neutral technological devices. There are different ways of use. There can be virtuous users and vicious users. That's the situation. So how do we draw a line to define? In different jurisdictions, there are different approaches. In our consultation documents, we explained our view. So only Singapore and Malaysia have concrete provisions tackling that. But I want to make a point. In our current provisions, as said just now, if communication right is confirmed as part of our copyright ordinance, then there is big ground to tackle the undesirable situations, depending on the actual cases and evidence. For the ISDs, well, people may have different criminal obligations and penalties. For example, they may be circumventing some provisions and also collusion to cheat and so on, to deceive and so on. So these are set out in the paper. So that's my response for the time being. Thank you. Mr. Wong Chun-shek. Thank you, Chairman. Basically, I support the administration's legislative proposal because a sound copyright regime is important to an economy. It protects creators' interests. So this proposal is based on the 2014 bill. As we all know, at that time, many members of the public and young people are skeptical and scared of the bill because they are worried that the freedom of secondary creation will be stifled. But then this time there will be exceptions on parody, satire, caricature, pastiche, and so on. Now, I welcome this because we need to enable young people and members of the public to have room for creation. However, Director and Secretary, in this amendment, there is no clear line of demarcation. So if there are these acts of parody, satire, caricature, and so on, will they be exempted? Well, I think that would be determined by the court or by the judicial system. So before the bill is tabled, can there be more concrete examples to let the public know which will be considered breaches and which will be exempted? Now, there are some clear examples in the market that will, may not be exempted. So can you give those examples as well? Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. In the last amendment, there was lengthy discussion on this point. It is, of course, the best if the law can be written very clearly. But at the beginning, we have got a consensus already. In the copyright ordinance, a balance should be struck between two sides. One, to protect the copyright owners, but it doesn't mean that the copyright must not be used by any other people. So concerning parody, satire, caricature, pastiche, and current affairs commentary, well, these can be exempted. However, what should be the approach? The objective is not to be biased towards any side. Well, we just want to find a feasible and reasonable way. Director, thank you for the question. As the Secretary said, last time in the consultation and in the scrutiny process, this issue was discussed many times. We have discussed with users and copyright owners. And we are all of the view that it is better not to have a definition. So if a point is not made in the statute, then we will consider the normal meaning of words. So apart from the meaning of parody, satire, and so on, there is the need for fair assessment. There are 4 statutory factors. 1, the use, the purpose of use, whether or not it is commercial in nature, the nature of the work, how many parts are being used by others out of the copyright works, and also the impact on the potential markets of the works. These are some good indicators to help people use the exceptions. And in other countries, we have not seen many unclear litigations arising from those exceptions. So with this legal principle, I believe the purpose can be met and there will be a good balance struck. I would like to supplement to a previous question about safe harbor asked by Mr. Leung. We have taken reference from many other countries like EU, UK, US, Australia, Canada. We have looked into their systems, and usually what we are proposing is in line with their systems. So in case of infringement, if a notification is made, it should be taken down. And for users in general, we need to do more publicity and explain clearly what should be done. And we have talked a lot about this last time. And this time we will enhance publicity work so that users and OSPs and also copyright owners will know clearly the benefits and details of the bill. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lam Kin Fong. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I agree that the copyright ordinance should be amended as soon as possible because our CO has been outdated for more than 10 years. So the amendment can protect copyright owners and it can also strengthen Hong Kong's business environment. A few years ago, the administration proposed amendment. However, at that time, because of filibustering of the opposition party, it was shelved. Now, with better electoral system, I believe that in the first half of this year, it is the right time for the administration to start legislative amendment again. This time, the amendment is based on the 2014 bill. However, in recent years, social environment, network, ecosystem has changed a lot. Recently, there are a lot more people doing commercial live streaming and political commentary live streaming, and there are a lot more online platforms. So will the administration review the related provisions and wordings? I remember that in October last year, Mr. Edward Yao said that you will not rule out the possibility that details will be added to the CO based on Hong Kong's national security law. Can the Secretary tell us the progress of such work? Thank you, Secretary. Chairman, in Mr. Lam's first question, well, of course, we are basing on the 2014 bill because back then, even though there were so many discussions and arguments, the Bills Committee of LegCo at that time completed scrutiny work and it was tabled to the LegCo. So that means at that time, enough consensus in society had been built. And this time we listed the 5 issues and we're of the view that they are must-do areas. So between 2014 and now, well, are we trying to stop the clock at 2014? Definitely not. Over the years, there has been evolution in technology. So if we look at the 5 areas, first, in light of technological developments, we adopt technology-neutral exclusive communication rights as the basis of amendment. That means no matter what the transmission method is, whether it is electronic or not, it will be governed by this amendment. So that means it will apply universally. Of course, if there are other needs for amendments, we can consider including them. So this is one important area in the 5 areas. And for Mr. Lam's second question, after national security law was or commenced, the government also reviewed whether there is the need to amend the law, but the two things do not contradict each other. It is not true that with NSL, we don't need to review other laws. And when the NSL elements are included, then there is not the need to invoke on the NSL. That is not the case. So if there is any infringement of the NSL will take care of that, but we will also take care of whether there is the need in other areas.
For example, movie censorship scheme, if there's a need, we will do an amendment as well under the NSL. But based on public consultation, we do not see anything that should be added to copyright amendment. I'm talking about NSL elements. During consultation or review, we have not seen such need. Otherwise, we will do necessary adjustments. Chairman Kwong? Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Yao, in relation to updating the copyright law, I support it. Other members have already talked about our copyright protection is already lagging behind compared to other jurisdictions. And we need to respond positively to the 14th five-year plan and the positioning offered to Hong Kong. So overall speaking, I support the government to stay focused on 2014 Amendment Bill, what is left undone. And there is a pressing need to legislate. On the other hand, I can see that internationally in most jurisdictions, they are still following a number of prescribed situations and objectives to offer exceptions. I support that Hong Kong at this stage still apply the principle of exhaustive exceptions to be listed because things are changing quite rapidly. Are you going to consider introducing a more flexible approach in the future? For example, from time to time, review the exceptions and based on actual needs to add or subtract from the list of exceptions so that the overall system is dynamic instead of making amendments all the time. I also want to remind the administration, a week ago, there is the issuance of this view of speeding up the industry in relation to IP matters. So I think Hong Kong needs to pay attention and make necessary adjustments so that local laws will not lag behind compared to the mainland ones affecting people's operations. Non-profit making and educational use should be clearly covered by the exceptions so that such work will not be affected by the new law. At the same time, I also support what Mr. Fox said. Do well public consultation, go deep, have concise conclusions, do well publications and promotions, do comparison with similar cases around the world. Let's not allow any new hurdles to come up. Mr. Yao, Mr. Wong, thank you for your views. They are very useful. I want to raise one point. We are aware that the copyright regime will need to be updated from time to time based on the actual situation. Back in 1997, we set up our own copyright law to protect the copyright regime. In 2003, 04, 07, 09, and 2020 even, we've done amendments to respond to the most pressing matters at the time. It's just that this time around, when it comes to public communication and digital environment, we are lagging behind by a huge margin. So we need to catch up. Afterwards, we will pay close attention to the development and see what needs to be done. for Appendix C, other copyright matters, because many people have proposed new subjects. For example, exploration of a certain data. So we do commit that after this amendment, we will continue to look at social developments and issues and see which items will have to be dealt with again. We talked about a unified market issue. For example, in the EU, they have one set of system covering copyright issues. We will stay very close to such developments. Thank you. Next is Hongman. Thank you. I agree that we should complete the amendment as soon as possible. We should implement and amend at the same time. Copyright owners or users or intermediaries in the market, they have different interests and demands. To come up with something that makes everyone happy is very difficult. So I agree to be practical and use the fundamental version to be the starting point and continue to perfect it. I have two questions. First, previously, the director of IP said that they would not ask people to point out the party of infringement. Are you going to actively intervene to investigate and prosecute? The 14th five-year plan supports Hong Kong to be an IP center. So for mainland China and Hong Kong created products, what is the actual system for exchange of such products? How do we decide which is authentic? Mr. Wong. Thank you, Ms. Hong. When it comes to infringement, prosecutions, accusations, or investigation, we have to go back to the foundation. Copyright is a private economic right. Just like your private property right. It's owned by you, you need to protect it. Copyright is special because it is not visible. It's not a physical thing. But when you use something, you are infringing upon others' rights. The copyright owners, does he agree or not agree to such use? There are many materials used on the internet. Most of the time, it is not involving economic benefits, or there is consent, silent consent from the owner. But the copyright owner doesn't really pay much attention to it. That is the majority of the cases. But when it comes to songs or movies, we are very serious in considering these IPs, and there will be a lot of pursuit in terms of criminal liability. So if there is any infringement, if you are not the person, of course, you can still report it, for example, to Customs and Excise Department, who will then look at the ultimate ownership of the copyright of that matter and then ask that person, are you licensing this person or do you provide silent consent? We have to deal with these legal matters first. When it comes to copyright transaction, it is different from other IP like patents or exterior designs or trademark, which will have to be registered before it obtains legal protection. Copyright does not need to go through registration. If it is original creation in terms of art, literature or music creations, automatically you will have copyright protection. So when it comes to transactions or licensed use, it is realized through a contract under the current legal system. If the copyright law is clear in defining who is the owner of the piece, you can rely on this right to license other people to use it, or you can sell it or do some collaboration. So we have very mature system in Hong Kong already. It is just about giving clear definition by the ordinance. Next, Mr. Ma Fong Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. In relation to this ordinance, two terms ago, when I represented the Cultural Center, I knew the sector really wanted to have this update. So I certainly support the update. At the beginning, Mr. Falk, the incumbent representative, also stated clearly the concerns of the sector and their expectations. I won't repeat those points. But today, I'm returned by the election committee, so I have to consider from an angle of overall or public interest when it comes to intellectual property and also copyright matters. They are very important matters, especially in a smart society, creative society. It is something we definitely need, and copyright protection is a very important social issue. Previously, the government has done a lot, but it was not passed by LegCo in the previous two terms because distorted principles or reasonings have been supported by the society. So the government needs to work harder. The 3-month consultation period, unfortunately, met with the pandemic. Level of concern from the community, according to my observation, is very much lacking. So the government will need to spare no effort in terms of publicizing the need of such update. Protection of IP and copyright protection, how important they are. And in our future society, this is going to be a very good growth engine. Cultural creations to enrich our spiritual life. That is my view. And then something more specific. I agree. To avoid very complicated or controversial issues so that we can move along with the amendment first. So more controversial issues, including site blocking and safe haven provisions. The government's attitude is that they don't want to create new rounds of controversy. I accept that. And then about streaming, I do not see any major controversy there, and I do not hear from the government any special reasons, except what Mr. Wong said. It's difficult to discriminate them on a technical level. But the IT sector representative in LegCo also said that they support the addition of limitation on streaming devices. When it comes to infringement, the cost is getting cheaper, but rights protection is getting more pricey. So the government should consider the topic of streaming, whether you can do more. I don't have much else to say. I just hope that during this term, the amendment bill can be passed as soon as possible. Mr. Yao, any response? Thank you, Mr. Ma, for your support. Views heard. Concerning streaming, Mr. Wong already covered that. I agree with Mr. Ma. The public needs to see the government and the LegCo are determined to update this outdated ordinance. The best public education is to present this amendment bill in great details through the Bills Committee so that people know what will happen after the amendment. In the past, we have come across many discussions, controversy, and difficulties, but actually, at the moment in LegCo, we don't see much irrational discussion or filibustering. If you look at the response during public consultation, the views we have collected, they're quite wide. They are from stakeholders, users, professional bodies, and other bodies. So hopefully, we can present all these views.
We hope that in future bills committee, when you do clause by clause examination, you will know very clearly the change after the bill. Thank you, Chairman. Next, Mr. Chang Yanyu. Thank you, Chairman. My first question is exception about fair use and fair treatment, and how will legislative or law enforcement bodies operate specifically. And just now a detailed answer was already given. I won't repeat the question. My second question is, looking at the consultation document, there are 3 potential research areas, and I'm happy to see that AI is one of the potential research areas. In the paper, the administration said that now in overseas countries, there is no specific rule in the copyright ordinance. In the UK, EU, in these 2 years, public consultation started, and they proposed concrete plans. In the UK, they said that they would like the UK to be a leader in regulation of AI. So in Hong Kong, what is the timetable of doing research on AI and related areas? We don't need to wait for presidents in other countries to do a review or discussion. Can we move faster? Thank you. Secretary, please. Thank you, Mr. Zhang, for the question. Well said. In technology development, very often we talk about many exciting issues, and a lot of views will be aroused. As a member said, in the UK and other countries, research is now being done, but still it is in preliminary stage, because in AI development, there are still many unknown factors and the direction is not clear yet. So how can we better utilize copyright regime? This is being discussed a lot in different countries. And in many international exchange conferences, this is being discussed. So after studying the subject, we need to enhance our knowledge. When we work on copyright, we need to know what is happening in the world in order to have good policy discussion. So when it comes to good public policies, we need to know what is happening in the world, what is the direction of development, what is the legal framework, and what are the issues to deal with. So we need clear discussion with the public. So this goes with AI. And if you refer to other NSCs, other copyright issues, different stakeholders have different views. Copyright owners want to talk about whether copyright protection should last 50 years or 70 years. And then those who are interested in technology development, they will talk about textual and data mining. So after these are done, what about the orphanage works? Then what should be done for libraries in the future? What should be the jurisdiction of the copyright tribunal? How wide should the jurisdiction be? We have to do more in-depth analysis in order to give a clear account to the public. As such as now, we hope to catch up with what we had lagged behind in the past 10 to 20 years. We need to think carefully about these issues, and priorities should be set. We will discuss with stakeholders and LegCo members more. So, for example, once every few years, we can review our copyright ordinance to see how it should develop and how it can be better utilized. Thank you. Any members who would like to speak for the second round? Any follow-up questions? If so, please raise your hands. If not, then Secretary, let me make my point. Well, there has been big controversy about CO, and I think we should catch up with what we have left behind as soon as possible. Today, many members expressed support. I guess the general public also are in agreement. In protecting copyright owners, I believe that we need to consider freedom of creation. The SARG needs to pay attention to that, because if there are overcorrections, excessive corrections, then creative people will be worried. And creativity in our society will be stifled. So I hope the administration can pay attention to that. The secretary said that this time, the consultation compared with last consultation, well, we have received fewer responses. So how big is the gap? How big is the difference between this and the last consultation? Well, not the last one, the one before the previous one, because in last LegCo, we did not have the conditions to do consultation. So the last exercise was done in 2014. I will see whether the director has the information. Well, okay, at that time, there were more than 1,000 responses. However, it's difficult to assess that figure, because at that time, there are many pro forma responses or letters with more or less the same content. But then the difference is, last time, when we would like to resume second reading debate, at that time there was filibustering in LegCo, and so the process was shelved. We were not able to table the bill further. So of course, that is something the government doesn't want to see, because of course, there are always differences in viewpoints in any bill, and there should be adequate discussion in LegCo to reach a consensus. Even though there may be the need for further amendments, there should be some outcomes. So when LegCo becomes now more orderly, we would like to be more practical. This time, even though the number of responses received is smaller, our colleagues had discussed with members of different sectors. As such as now, in the industry, no matter whether we are talking about copyright owners, professional bodies, and service providers, there are different service providers in electronic media, and they have given their views. And after this LegCo assumed position, different political parties discussed with us many times. Some had taken the initiative to raise the discussion. Some discussions took place within and outside the panel. So we are thankful of that. So Chairman, if you agree, we hope to complete the drafting of bill as soon as possible. And we hope that within the shortest period of time, we can table the bill to LegCo for scrutiny. Thank you, Secretary. There is impact from the pandemic, because in the past, there were many discussions and meetings, so members of the public can understand, and we can also gather more views. But then under the pandemic, well, we cannot have physical meetings. We conduct meetings on Zoom. We cannot conduct public hearing. So I hope you will collect more people and more parties' views as soon as possible. Okay, so this agenda item is a legislative proposal. So I need to conclude or summarize this panel's position. Well, the majority of members are in support of your proposal. So thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Agenda item 4, progress report of the funding schemes under the Innovation and Technology Fund. Let's welcome from Innovation and Technology Bureau, Secretary for Innovation and Technology, Mr. Alfred Sitt, and his colleagues. Again, can our helpers remove all the raise hand signals or signs first? So now I invite members to raise hands on Zoom. I will now invite Mr. Sitt to speak. Thank you, Chairman, members. I'm happy to attend this meeting of the panel on commerce and industry. I want to report to members the latest progress of various funding schemes under the ITF. The details are already included in the paper submitted to Secretariat. The fund was established in 1999. It has been financing projects that contribute to the innovation and technology upgrading in our industries. And now there are 17 funding schemes covering different areas. For example, supporting R&D, facilitating technology adoption, nurturing I&T talents, and supporting technology startups. We supported more than 50 R&D centers and laboratories, and we support I&T work on all rounds. Well, the fund has made a lot of contribution to Hong Kong. Many talents are being developed, startups and research outcomes have been implemented. A lot of private investment has been attracted. And then for startups and venture capital investments in recent years, there was very satisfactory growth. We have seen the birth of more than 10 unicorns. So this shows that the Hong Kong I&T ecology is getting mature. And then as stated in the 14th five-year plan, Hong Kong should be developed into an international I&T center. So a strong foundation has been laid. And in the budget, a number of enhancement measures are set out. For example, for the 16 state key laboratories and also the branches, more support should be given. So they should be given more support to train talents, and then they can have more cooperation and exchange with mainland counterparts. Besides, in the budget, there is more funding for universities and also I&T enterprises to commercialize their research findings. Then ITC is going to make good use of the fund. We will listen to views from different stakeholders so as to better meet social needs. In different areas of I&T, we will give our support. We hope members will continue to support the fund's operation. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. Now, there are some colleagues who have raised hands already. Let me read out the names. First, Mr. Sun Dong, and then Mr. Leung Chi-wing, Mr. Chow Man Kwong, Mr. Yao Tat-kun, Mr. Liu Cheng-kong, Mr. Ng Wing Kai, Ms. Hong Man, Mr. Tam Ho Han, Mr. Wang Chun-shek, and Mr. Chan Cho-hang, and Mr. Ma Fong-kwok too. Because of time, well, we have to conclude the meeting at 4:30, so we will have 3 minutes for both question and answer. Thank you. Mr. Sun Dong, thank you, Chairman. Let me declare interest. In the past 20 years, well, I was a beneficiary of the ITF, and we received funding of a few 10 million. In Hong Kong, there were many projects. For example, in the past years, I've been promoted from lecturer to professor. So I think the I&T development is very instrumental to Hong Kong's development. So I would like to express my gratitude to ITC colleagues. Of course, we need to conclude our experience to have better development. I have 3 suggestions. Number 1, in the past, for large teams, large scientists, there were a number of schemes and projects for them. In the future, I hope that there should be some schemes and projects for small and medium-sized teams. Well, they may not be very renowned, but then I think it will be better to invest in them when they are still small. The outcomes will be a lot better. Some time ago, I contacted SMEs, and they are of the view that it is very difficult to apply to ITF, and the process is very cumbersome. Well, in the past years, I also encountered many problems in application. So I think the government should try to plug this loophole. And I do understand the difficulty involved. In the future, when it comes to efficiency and for the administration to serving as gatekeeper, a better balance should be struck. Things should be outcome-oriented. So I think we need to have a better top-line design of the scheme. Third, about talents. ITC had launched postgraduate scholarship. That is very good. Many of my students benefited. Besides, in the past, money was invested into projects, and then the projects will recruit people. This took a long process. In other countries, the enterprises or the money will be invested directly into people, and the people will approach companies with the money in their pockets. So I think this is another alternative that can be considered. Thank you. Secretary, please seize the time to respond. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Sun, for your commendation of our work. In the past 20-odd years, ITF already invested more than a few 10 billion, and there are more than 30,000 beneficiary projects. So based on the three main directions stated just now, we want to support more small to medium-sized teams, and then we would like to enhance efficiency in terms of talents. We will be talent-based so that the whole process can also facilitate talent development. Thank you, Mr. Sun, for your recognition. We will take on board your views.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to ask about the key labs. The ministry has given approval in 2013 for the Hong Kong branches. 2015. Are they still operating? How come after 2013 and 15, no new approvals have been given? How will the administration fight for more such key labs to be set up in Hong Kong? And then about the transfer at the university level, how do we turn ideas and creations into products? 729 patents have been approved in 2021, and licensing also issued. What is the total funding amount? How many of them have been turned into new services or products? And what about the revenue? Any statistics? Third question is about Mrs. Carrie Lam's first policy address in 2017. Within 5 years, local R&D expenses should be enhanced from 0.75% to 1.3% of GDP. Are we meeting the target? If not, what is the current level? And what about funding support in relation to GPD and also to local R&D expenses? Can we promote innovation and technology by enhancing the level? 3 minutes. Otherwise, you can provide written response. Thank you. The questions are very comprehensive. 16 key labs and 6 research centers are still operating normally and performing very well. We have been liaising with the ministry in relation to the labs and the institutions. They are very prudent in considering all these operations. So at the opportune time, we will fight for more institutions to be set up. For university funding scheme, actually in our paper, we have talked about the amount and also results. If necessary, Mr. Leung, we're happy to provide more detailed information to you after the meeting. On the total expenditure, 2014, it was 16.7 billion. In 2020, it was 26.5 billion and 0.9% to our GDP in 2020. It will be enhanced to 1.5% later. Chairman Kwong. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Sit, in relation to your efforts made in recent years, enhancing R&D expenses and its ratio in GDP, I want to show my appreciation and thanks. All these efforts are very effective in promoting innovation and technological advancements. The government has set a target on the expenses to GDP should be enhanced from 0.73% to 1.5%. In 2020, almost 1%. So will you reach the target this year? Perhaps not so soon. What else can the government do to reach the target? Secondly, if we look at the Greater Bay Area, Shenzhen, Dongguan have set up aggressive R&D policies and funding schemes. So will our government say something that is more aggressive in terms of innovation and R&D targets so as to narrow the gap? Will the government take the lead in formulating R&D targets funded by the government? For example, using the ITF as the flagship to drive other R&D funds. Finally, I see the government has launched this talent base, and you are also providing cash subsidies. I think it's a great thing. You will be able to attract many people to join the INT sector. We also see responses from SMEs saying that the market salary has been driven up, but some SMEs do not qualify to apply for such subsidies. So it makes it harder for them to hire the right talents. So technological enhancement for these SMEs may be hindered. Are you going to further relax the threshold so that more SMEs can apply for the funding? Thank you. Mr. Sid, 30 seconds. Thank you. With LESCO's support, the government will work even harder in terms of investment into INT. If you look at the ITF, in recent years, 700 million in 2013-14, a sevenfold increase to 4.8 billion. So the most important thing is about taxation support so that more private enterprises will join. For the Greater Bay Area, our collaboration with other cities will be strengthened. As for SMEs, the RTH has been lowering its threshold continuously so as to attract more people to participate. Mr. Chu Tagan, thank you. I am a partner under one of the funding schemes. You probably don't have time to respond. You only have 3 minutes. A few things. We're talking about INT. According to a 2017 report, 45 billion was the indicator. You talked about 26.5, which shows great improvement, but there is further room for improvement. In various institutions, it's important to introduce INT devices. We have key state labs. We should ask for more labs to be set up or similar projects to be set up. Higher-end INT projects, more of them should be coming to Hong Kong so that we can match our investment in relation to GDP. Private investment is on a low side. Total amount raised in Hong Kong in the INT sector earlier on the seed round in 2016, 17 already peaked. 2019, 2020, many unicorns, big ones. One of them or two of them use a lot of money already. So 2016, 17 or 18 would be the peak for financing. Because of early financing, a lot of funds came in from the government, but private investment is also playing a bigger role in terms of supporting the unicorns. Most of them are getting investment from private enterprises. How do we attract more private entities to participate? That is one important consideration. I have 2 suggestions and 3 documents. The tech voucher, Mr. Sid, every week I'm receiving many complaints. Hong Kong PC has been speeding up the approval, but the allocation of funds, I got complaints that after signing contracts and submission of documents, people are waiting for 5 months or longer. For SMEs, it's a big issue. How can we expedite the process? And what about the RTH? I got many complaints. A lot of cash flow has been suspended because for these talents, they have to wait for 1 year for approval, and then to obtain the funding, they need to wait for 2 years. So can you offer more flexibility? The quota doesn't have to follow the name of a person. For example, 3 documents, the cash refund scheme. 170 entities have been approved. I want the list. And 28 cases for RFS. I want the information. And Inno Hong Kong, 28 labs, they have already arrived. What about overseas experts coming to Hong Kong? Can I get the name list as well? Thank you. We're more than happy to provide the information to you. But concerning the voucher, more than 13,000 applications we have already reviewed, more than 80%. About 10%, 97% of them have been supported, have been approved. So the approval figures or proportion is quite positive. We will continue to work very hard to try to make everyone happy. The people are waiting for 4 or 5 months after approval to get the funding. I'll give you the remaining time in the next round. Mr. Liu Changhuang. ITF has been launched for more than 20 years. There are 17 projects to promote INT advancement in Hong Kong. It's playing an important role, but in terms of use of funding, the administration has the responsibility to make sure the implementation of various projects are done better. I want to refer to para 5B, 2019. Concerning MHKJFS, by end of February, only 38 projects have been funding. 73 million funding in total. So can you tell us more details since the launch of this plan? How many applications have you received? How come only so few have been funded? Is it because the procedures of application is too complicated, or the scope is too narrow, or other reasons? Finally, in terms of INT, 130 billion has already been invested. So we see the determination. But in terms of methodology, perhaps more needs to be done. According to the latest figures, 2020, on the total expense to GDP, only 0.5%. To enhance that, the pacing is very slow. Compared to 2017 target, 1.5% is still lagging behind. The latest 5-year plan has already made it clear that there should be this INT center set up in Hong Kong and Sanctions. It's not a slogan. Shouldn't we have new mindset to catch up? Do you have any internal review? Do you have any plan for internal review? In terms of promoting IND work, what is missing? And what about IETF? The 6 support programs under it. Is there room for further improvement? Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Liu. You talked about MHKJFS. It was launched in April 2019. In the past 2 years, we have obtained a lot of support from universities. Up to May 2015, we have received 130 applications, which is stage 1. We review all the applications with the ministry, and then we will approve them. At the moment, 38 have been approved. The proportion is not small at all. In 20 2022 Q2, we will invite more people to apply. As for your second question, we will spare no effort in attracting more private funds to support our INT work. And we will continue to spare no effort in supporting such measures. We will invest more. If there is time, I will tell you more details about our plan. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Ng Wing Kai. Thank you, Chairman. I want to talk about the funding scheme on research or researchers hub. So when employing those with PhD degrees or master's degrees, 18,000 and 32,000 of subsidy as the upper limit are there. So in 2004, well, there was another researcher scheme, and the two schemes are more or less the same. So in employing researchers with first degree and master's degree, the upper limit of funding is 12,000 and 16,000. But then there was only an increase by 2,000. So are you going to increase the funding amount for that scheme so that comparing with 2004, now it is already 18 years from 2004. So otherwise, the scheme is not attractive enough to attract talents. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Ng. Mr. Ng's point is right. Recently, we consolidated the research talent pool so that past funding schemes are enhanced. They can attract more talents, so that enterprises will get subsidy to employ researchers. Concerning the funding amount, let me talk about the tenor. In the past 2 years, now 36 months. So research work can be more sustainable. And for scope of enterprises covered, the scope covers all enterprises in Hong Kong doing research work. So up till now, I think the scheme is very attractive. 6,000 odd researchers have benefited. 2,400 of them hold PhD degree. So I will defer to Ms. Choi to supplement. Thank you, Chairman. Regarding the funding amount in 2018, well, it was reviewed. So the current amounts were set at that time. At that time, we looked at salaries of similar positions. And now it has been a few years thereafter, and the environment in INT is better. So we think that it is time that we should review the pay. We hope that the amount is very attractive so that we can attract more students studying engineering and technology related subjects to join the trade. And so far, we think that the effectiveness is high. We are reviewing our funding amounts and subsidy. If enterprises are of the view that some people should be paid higher, well, they can also pay them higher. Thank you. Next, Ms. Hong Man. Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, on different occasions, I have been saying that to develop INT, well, the industrial chain should be first developed. I think INT is much more than research. If we only promote research, R&D, we can't form an INT ecosystem. We can't form a value closed loop. No matter how much you invest into R&D, no matter how much of GDP R&D accounts for, it can't be sustainable in the market. Right now, when it comes to INT strategy in Hong Kong, we are talking about industrialization in the Greater Bay. I do not agree to that direction. We are working for other people. Well, profit from the R&D work only accounts for a small share of the industrial chain. Well, with R&D, it is difficult to form an industrial chain locally. Only the laboratories and R&D centers can benefit. We want to diversify our industries and create more jobs for young people, but the use in these areas is very limited. So please use the funds in the perspective of creating an industrial chain. INT talents are important to INT development. However, Hong Kong now relies on local talents a lot. If we cannot nurture local talents, then the situation is very unhealthy. So in nurturing local talents, what are some measures of cooperation between ITF and the education sector? Are there ways to nurture local talents? If an enterprise employs overseas talents, well, they should nurture local talents as a match. Can this be considered? Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Chairman and Ms. Hong. I agree with Ms. Hong a lot. In developing INT, how can we enable the whole society to benefit more? Well, we need to do R&D. We need to improve our industrial chain so that outcome of R&D can be commercialized, and there can be better economic force, and the products can improve people's standard of living, and quality jobs can be created. This is important. So I agree with Ms. Hong. If you refer to the 17 funding schemes, 6 are related to R&D. And you can see that there are schemes on promoting use of technology. For example, the technology vouchers, reindustrialization funding scheme, and also funding scheme to support the startups. The goal is, as mentioned by Ms. Hong, we want to commercialize the outcome of R&D. In the process, talents are most important. So we need to nurture our talents. Let me give an example. How do we cooperate with the education sector? We have an INT internship scheme. In the past 2 years, for those STEM students, well, there were 4,700 students who had benefited. We worked with universities. So in summer and winter holidays, young people can have internship opportunities in INT companies. This is a successful scheme. And so it is also an example to answer Ms. Hong's question. We understand that it is of utmost importance to nurture local talents. Thank you, Ms. Hong, for your reminder. Next, Mr. Tam. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. I support that the government should invest more into ITF. In recent years, the government's work was satisfactory, and expenses of the fund increased a number of times. So we can see that the government is doing a lot to promote INT development. Apart from making more investment, I think there is another indicator about development of INT. That is public-private percentage of INT investment all along. Government funds and universities funds are the main. Private participation and investment does not amount to a big amount. For example, in the UK, the public to private ratio is 3 to 7. So 70% from private. In Singapore, 4 to 6. But then in Hong Kong, 6 to 4. So government dominates the scene. In order to build a healthy INT ecology, we may need to further enhance and raise the investment from private sector. So in the ITF, there are some schemes encouraging private investment. For example, the partnership research scheme, enterprise resource scheme, and also cash rebate scheme, and so on. So now, do you have any concrete channels to encourage private sector to invest in INT? For example, are there some concrete directions and indicators? Can we, or do we have a target of 5 to 5? I think this can help create a healthy INT ecology so that Hong Kong can be developed into an international INT hub. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Tan. Thank you, Mr. Tan, for your support to our work in promoting INT. Mr. Tan's point is very right. How can we better attract private enterprises to increase R&D expenditure? In promoting INT, well, this is an important point. The numbers cited by Mr. Tan are the facts. Right now, R&D expenditure is led by the government. So government 60%, enterprises 40%. In 2017, we would like to shift that to 45% from government, 65% from private. Well, for private enterprises, of course, they are influenced by the pandemic. They are worried about investment. But on the government's level, we will give strong support. As such as now, there are support schemes under the fund, and there is also a tax rebate approach. So tax incentives are used to attract enterprises to invest into R&D. For the first 2 million, there can be 300% tax rebate. So we will use different ways to attract private companies to invest into INT. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Tan. We will continue to work hard. Next, Mr. Wang Chun-shak. Thank you, Chairman. In the paper, para 5C. So it is about patent application scheme. In April 2017 to February 2020, 702 applications were received, but only 129 were successful. And the amount involved was 170 million. That means 18% of the funds was not successful. I want to ask why the success rate is so low comparing to the total amount of funds approved. Are there any factors which had delayed the overall patent application or registration? Have you quantified the amount of economic benefits brought by the patents? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wong. Referring to patent application, well, there are many parts that need government support. There are some friends who reminded the government to apply for patents in Hong Kong and overseas. Well, a lot of resources have to be spent. So that's why we are putting in place this patent application scheme. Mr. Wong is right. Even if our funding can be approved, in order to achieve a patent, there is a patent evaluation process. And this evaluation may take place in Hong Kong or overseas, and this takes time. Mr. Wong asked how to quantify the economic benefits after patents are successfully obtained. Well, this is a very broad process. I'll see whether Mr. Poon has anything to add. This is the right direction. So how can we quantify the economic benefits from the 129 patents? Ms. Poon, thank you, Chairman. Regarding the patent application funding scheme, our goal is to help those local companies that have not got patents in the past and also permanent residents in Hong Kong. And the upper limit of the funding is 200,000. There are 129 in which patents have been obtained. This is not a small number. As such as now, to apply for local and overseas patents, it usually takes a few years. And in the whole scheme, our partner, Hong Kong Productivity Council, will help the applicants to complete the process. And there are lawyers to help them complete the procedures. In the future, when patent is obtained, how can they achieve more benefits? We will work further with Hong Kong PC to see what can be done. Now, after the first patent is applied for a certain invention, we hope in the future more benefits can be generated. Thank you. Next, Mr. Chan Cho Hang, Deputy Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Secretary. I agree with Mr. Sun Dong and other colleagues. For our INT projects and the size of these projects, we need to review and evaluate. Let me give the Secretary and the Permanent Secretary some examples. There are two major categories. Now, for projects like RFS, the amount is 1.5 million Hong Kong dollars, not small. But if some projects are smaller in scale, should the government adopt similarly tight criteria? I think this is about risk management. This is not only about ITB. Well, for the commerce Bureau, I have talked about this with them as well. For the big projects, mainly the applicant. For small projects, no one is applying because the process is too cumbersome. The government can say that there is no applicant, but there is really this issue in reality. So can the government review? There are 2 tiers. Can there be 2 tiers so that things can be simplified? For the procurement process, it can also be simplified.
And then research versus development. If we are talking about INT, reindustrialization, it is not easy, the research part. But if we look at traditional industries, it's more on application of technologies instead of innovation-related research. So can the administration look into this, especially when we look at relatively smaller scale application? Can we encourage more such development? Because they need to have speedy procedure for application. They need it done within 1 year instead of dragging on for 2 or 3 years. They need to move along very quickly. So I hope to see more encouragement so that SMEs can use more such funding support and have more diversified development and application. Thank you for the reminder. I will take the second part first, and then my colleague will respond to division of labor in the process. As Mr. Chan has reminded us, how do we support enterprises to use technologies? That is very important because other than promoting R&D, which is equally important, of course, it is also about creating an industry chain so that enterprises can make good use of technologies, including traditional industries. The CITB and the ITF are exactly doing that. Madam Choi? Mr. Chen, you talked about this direction in relation to enterprise support scheme. We are already doing that in terms of application with smaller amounts, I think around 2 million. Then the process can be sped up. For larger scale projects, there will be more stringent procedures. That is how we handle the applications. For other funding support schemes, can we do something similar? I'm sure Madam Poon has already heard you loud and clear. She will look into feasibility. We also talked about application and development. We're talking about product development side. How do we use the technologies to develop products? So you can see that we are not talking about research funds, but research and development funds. So that is development having equal level of importance. We also cover product development. Many enterprises can apply for funding schemes if they do product development. Thank you. Next, Ma Fung Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. I want to follow up on these funding schemes and the effectiveness. First of all, PRP, 180 projects. If the enterprises can provide more than 50% of the funds, they can own the IP. How many of the projects can reach that threshold? And what about the outcome? How much can be commercialized? How do you assess the economic benefit created? And then about the RTH, more than 6,000 applications. How do you consider? What are the criteria for approval? Are you aware? What kind of R&D projects have they participated in? After employment is concluded, how many of these talents would stay in Hong Kong to work or study? And finally, what are the criteria to assess the effectiveness of this scheme? Mr. Sid. Madam Poon will respond to the first question. Second question about RTH and the effectiveness. As mentioned in the document, when all the works have been completed, for example, after 3 years, we would ask the participants in relation to what they think about the scheme, and also whether the R&D work has been continued. That's how we assess effectiveness. As for the approval procedure, first of all, the R&D content of the enterprise, the experience, they're all relevant criteria when we review the application. Ms. Poon would take the first question about the arrangements. Thank you, Chairman. Concerning PRP, it is the most grounded plan because we ask local R&D institutions and universities and companies to collaborate with us in terms of R&D. If the company is able to provide 50% of the sponsorship, they will own the IP of the project. It will help the company to further launch the outcome of their work. Very often, the companies are capable of providing 50% to implement the scheme. If they collaborate with certain R&D institutions or centers, if they can provide 30 to 50% of such sponsorship or funding, the projects can be implemented. So the implementation is very good, about 50%. We will continue to promote our R&D centers and universities to work with companies to do more grounded R&D programs. Thank you. So we have completed the first round. For the second round, I see Chun Sek with his hand raised. Anyone else? Please raise your hand now. If not, Mr. Wong. Thank you, Chairman. I want to follow up on a previous question. Mr. Sid agrees that we need to quantify funding and assess economic benefits to Hong Kong. I don't think the Commissioner has provided a very straightforward answer. We need a way to quantify the funding to support patent application is over 170 million. We have to tell the public. What are the benefits created to Hong Kong? When we carry out EV audits, we need to inform the public that this is not an expense, it's a kind of investment. If we have some quantification methodology, then we can assess if the projects supported are really making a difference. If you don't have this criteria today, please consider setting them up and then submit the information to the panel. Mr. Sid, there are no more members waiting to speak. I will give you 5 minutes to respond to Mr. Wong and see if any outstanding questions have not yet been answered. For example, from Ms. Yao Takan. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wong. Just now you talked about how to measure the outcome of our effort and quantify the projects. I totally support that. It's definitely worth doing. For the 17 funding programs, they have a very wide coverage, and indeed, we have different methods to do quantification. For example, we talked about some support schemes for enterprises. One of the ways to quantify the outcome is to see if the R&D will reach certain patent application or whether the products with our support can actually reach the market or even attract more investments. That is about R&D and commercialization. If we're talking about nurturing talents, we have an internship scheme, which is rather new, the STEM internship scheme. When youngsters participate in the scheme during the summer breaks or winter breaks, when they return to school, or their original position? Are they more willing to do innovation and technology related work? We have sent surveys to those completing the internship scheme. We asked them, because of the internship experience, will they be more willing to enter the INT sector? We have very practical questions. And what about the employers after seeing the performance of the interns? Are they more confident in the youngsters? When their enterprises move forward, are they willing to run the internship scheme again? Or they engage such youngsters in their INT work? If you look at the 17 schemes with different contents, based on the actual situation, we will have corresponding quantification work. I strongly agree with Mr. Wong. The government is using public funds. We must effectively use the funds and measure the outcome with different indicators. Based on our previous experience, you can see that there are some new schemes being added. Based on original ones, we will do consolidation to make them more effective, because we have done quantification and we see certain overlap of schemes. Some are more popular, some are less popular. What are the reasons behind that? We need to consolidate, and we'll continue on with such work. Mr. Xu talked about other issues and other members talked about other issues. I will do a general response. For 17 programs, I want to emphasize one thing. Other than the ITF, actually, when it comes to R&D work at the universities, our Education Bureau also have different R&D support schemes involving fundamental scientific research. For ITF, the most important thing is to provide assistance to universities' results of research, make it applicable so that it's applied scientific research, and then they can be turned into patents or commercialized products. Just like how members have reminded us time and again, we need to commercialize the results of R&D to create real benefits. In this process, we need talents. Hong Kong, as a metropolitan, we will continue to attract talents. We also have various schemes and platforms to nurture our own talents. In terms of R&D in the past, perhaps we haven't done enough in terms of attracting and nurturing talents. So you can see the ITF and also the incumbent administration. On top of this fund, we are also doing a lot of nurturing at secondary and primary school levels. Thank you, Chairman. Allow me to supplement. Well, I'm sorry. We have to hand over the time at 4:30. So 30 seconds for you. Well, it's been mentioned that we have to recruit people based on the projects. But we have outstanding talent scheme and also RTH to facilitate talent recruitment. We are continuing on this direction. As for technological transfer, Mr. Leung asked about the outcome. I just want to add that the annual subsidy, it is only part of their expenses. They do have other sources of funding. So it is difficult to decide if the commercialization actually comes from our funding. But if you look at annual reports of universities, they do inform you of technical transfer work. Understood. Okay, we have to wrap up on time. So that's the end of our discussion. Any AOB? Any AOB? If not, meeting adjourned. If you have further questions, please provide written follow-ups. Thank you very much.